to today's final session for the Arctic Frontier business, and that is the Low Carbon World Mission Impossible ? Now, we have the very best speakers to talk to us about this, and I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Greta Ellingsen. She is the CEO of GCE Node, which is the offshore shipping cluster in the south of Norway. Now, what is she doing here when we're talking about the Arctic? Well, you'll see she knows quite a lot about how to address a low-carbon world, not only with ocean technologies, but also the way you do business. Please, Grete.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, let me just introduce the cluster in southern part of Norway. It's a cluster of 90+ companies serving the global maritime and energy sector, primarily oil and gas, but we are also now in renewable energy. We have two main strategies. That is to improve the competitiveness in the areas where we are working. And I think the industry have really achieved major results by cutting costs over the last couple of years. And the companies and Node has been quite active in that. We have also expanded technology to new markets and been working actively with that since 2013. And that is renewable in open sea and also fish farming equipment and subsea mining. It's a high export sector, one of the highest export sectors from Agder in Norway. We are very proud of being a part of the oil and gas sector in Norway. It's a very high competence sector and has been the basis for developing the technology that we export all over the world. It's a sector which is also very suited for ocean technology crossover, which we, as I said, been working since 2013. We have a lot of technologies in the oil and gas sector that we can use in a lot of other sectors. And we all see that with our companies now, we are supplying to several other sectors than the oil and gas sector based on the technology that we have developed in the oil and gas sector. We are a part of an industry which have delivered safe, secure, and improved environmental footprint. That is due to very, very strict regulation introduced by Norwegian authorities in the 70s and the 80s. As a matter of fact, it was so strict that some of the major companies threatened to leave Norway. But they stayed on, and we are today one of the world leaders when it comes to emissions to air and to sea, and also with safety measures, but also improved recovery. One of the highest recovery rates in the world you will find in Norwegian sectors. This gives a basis of export of very good equipment, very good systems, and very good technology all over the world. But we do not stop there. There has been a tremendous work in the industry for a roadmap that was published in 2016. We have been active taking part in that. And we are now working on how could we report on the contribution that our industry is giving to our customers for a lower carbon footprint. And this year, there is a new initiative from the industry, which is based on how can we continue the good work that we've started to reduce cost, increase safety, and improve also environmental footprint. And the last initiative here now is all about how do we take on digitalization in the industry? How can we use digitalization to improve the way we are working, more remote operation, more subsea operation, but also more intelligent use of data to develop services that can give us a lower footprint, but also higher safety and better operational stability and lower cost. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Grete, for introducing the important group of oil services into the discussion, and we'll revert to that as well when we have our panel. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cognite and Trygve Rønningen. He is a representative of a company that many today follow with interest because it's a company that is trying very hard to operationalize the advantages of digitalization and what will it actually mean. It's a company owned by Aker and Aker BP, and Trygve, he comes into this not with a long track record in oil and gas industry. He's an economist, and he comes from hospitality and from working abroad. And I think it's indicative of when you're trying to be disruptive in the way you do things, you have to bring in a lot of different kinds of people. Vær så god, Trygve.
Thank you. On behalf of Cognite, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate at the Arctic Business Conference. Actually, last time I was on this stage, I had the pleasure of be part of the opening of this hotel, together with Petter Stordalen. Unfortunately, security here didn't allow me to use one of his entry points by rappelling down from the ceiling, but maybe that's good for me as well. Cognite was established by Dr. John Marcus Lervik about 12 months ago. After just a few months in operation, we have already onboarded 50 very talented members into our team. Cognite's ambition is to build the world's best industrial brain with ability to ingest and process industrial data using cognitive computing. Currently, the Cognite platform is in operation across all of Aker BP's assets, handling live and historical data from 200,000 sensors. At a peak, we transfer around 800,000 data points per second. If my calculation is correct, that's actually more than Google has globally searched on their website on a normal day. Through the Cognite platform, third-party applications and data scientists have access to more than 1 trillion data points to support Aker BP's strategy and to create value for the users. So why is Cognite's vision relevant to today's topic, business in a low-carbon world, mission impossible? Well, we at Cognite believe that today's technologies can be a facilitator for low-carbon business. Digitalization projects that we're engaged with at Aker BP and other customers clearly show that most industrial businesses today gather a massive amount of data, but very few have a clear strategy or a vision for how to turn the data into actionable insight. Last year, The Economist wrote how Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple have become some of the largest companies in the world by creating new and disruptive businesses based on massive amount of data being gathered from their commerce or B2C channels. Information that we, consumers, provide them with, and they can build very efficient businesses around that. Cognite believe we can replicate similar disruptive business models in the industrial or B2B world, and we strongly believe it starts by having access to the data. As an example, SpaceX autonomous rocket learned from its failures in the beginning to embark on 18 successful landings, and in 7 years went from 0 to 60% market share in the commercial launch market. Today, we can leverage readily available cloud computing technologies to manage large volume of data at a reasonable cost. By cleaning, normalizing, and contextualizing the data, we can apply machine learning algorithms to predict degradation or anomalies of the operational equipment. Such predictions do not only provide a safer environment for people that operate equipment, but also preventing possible environmental hazards. Other highly relevant industries industry use cases are related to production optimization. Are all the equipment performing in the most optimal way? Are we utilizing more production equipment than necessary? How can we consume less energy by realigning our production processes? Cloud computing, big data, analytics, and machine learning are just a few examples of the technologies we believe can facilitate a low-carbon business. Thank you.
Thank you, Trygve. Thank you very much, Trygve. This is very much part of the future, I would say, and I am delighted to introduce to you one of the key players in understanding how sustainability can not only be taken into consideration, but tracked and measured. And I'm delighted to introduce Anthony Hobley. He has a background in clean energy law. He's been with the recognized firm Norton Rose Fulbright. He told me before we started that he's a reformed lawyer. Wonder what that means. And I told him that once a lawyer, always a lawyer. It's in your blood like malaria. But we are today welcoming you as CEO of Carbon Tracker Initiative. Please.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here. Yes, so well, hopefully, good, slides are up. Yes, I actually think I said recovering lawyer, but yes, once a lawyer, always a lawyer, sadly. I work for an organization which is quite difficult to understand. We're a philanthropically funded NGO, but we're all financial market professionals. A lot of my colleagues are former asset managers, sell-side analysts, and investment bank analysts. So it's a little bit like a philanthropically funded, boutique research house based in the City of London and Wall Street. So I could come here and talk to you about all of the, climate and environmental concerns that we must act, the scientific case, the moral case, and so on. But I think what's far more interesting and why this may not be mission impossible is the financial case. That we are very much now in a technology-driven low-carbon transition. Increasingly, it makes financial sense. And increasingly, it actually does not make financial sense to continue with business as usual, as I will say. I mean, just to put this into context, the cost of onshore wind has fallen 29% since 2008. Offshore wind has fallen even more. I mean, that's quite dramatic. And that sounds great, but compare that to photovoltaics. The cost of photovoltaic cells has fallen 99.1% since 2008. The price of electricity from solar PV has fallen from $76.67 per watt in 1997 to 0.29 cents a watt in 2016, making electricity from solar PV cheaper than coal. And we are seeing the economic impacts of that, as we'll come on to. I mean, Peabody and most of the US's listed coal companies went into Chapter 11. Many are still in Chapter 11. Peabody, the biggest listed coal company in the world, was telling investors a year before it went into bankruptcy there was going to be this huge, increase in demand, et cetera, et cetera. If you had put your money into listed coal stocks 5 or 6 years ago, you'd be lucky to have 5 to 1% of that investment left, if at all. If you'd put your money into energy utilities in Europe 10 years ago, you would probably be lucky to have 20 to 30% left. They've lost between 80 and 60% of their value because they made the wrong bets. We are in a disruptive transition, but we've been there before. Railways to automobiles, Kodak film to digital, etc. But in many ways, this transition we're now in is much more encompassing. We did some energy demand modeling with Imperial College in London using a standard energy demand model, the sort of thing Shell, BP, IEA use. When you update a lot of the cost data, when you update a lot of the assumptions, when you take more middle-of-the-road assumptions for population growth, GDP, et cetera, compared to what the industry is using, you get very, very different results. We predict that we will see coal demand peak in 2020 and then decline dramatically. Oil demand could peak as early as 2020. And we may still see some growth in demand for gas, but massively curtailed by contrast to what the industry is telling you. We could see solar PV supplying 23% of global power by 2040 and 29% by 2050. That's massive when you look at how the business models of many of the big oil and gas companies are geared. Electric vehicles could provide 35% of road transport by 35 and over 66% by 2050. There's research coming out since that report that actually makes us look quite conservative in that regard. And another really important factor here, for years, decade after decade after decade, oil and gas stocks gave a great return above the benchmark for a very low beta, very low risk. In the last decade, that has changed dramatically. Even when the oil price was at $120 a barrel, that return on capital was declining. So yes, you may say the oil price is going up. It will. There will be volatility over the next 30 years, but the overall structural change will be down. But the return on capital from those companies is never going to be what it was. And that also applies for all of the service companies in the whole chain. So if that's your future for the Arctic, that could be a very dangerous bet. And I think this is important to take that into account. Coal. This could be a sign of what is to come for oil and gas if the companies do not recalibrate their business models. And that's the key, because we will still need a lot of oil and gas over the next 30 years, but the question is going to be which oil and gas do we need and which don't we need? For coal, we did a piece of, this is a graph from our European coal report we did, which shows that 54% of the current EU coal fleet is currently operating at a loss, and the rest is marginal. We did a piece on US coal that shows that 78% of US coal-fired generation is now having to be subsidized by the US ratepayer to compete with the cleaner alternatives, to the tune, potentially by 2020, of billions, 10 billion a year, which could be 10% of the electricity bill for some US energy users. So effectively, those energy users are paying a 10% premium to keep that coal going to pollute their atmosphere. When you've spent years being told renewables only works when it's subsidized, it is quite sweet, the fact that coal now only works when it's subsidized. And is oil and gas, to come? Very much depends on how the oil and gas companies react. Just last slide to finish. We did this piece of Imperial. We did an interactive piece here where you can play around with the different settings. Even with weak climate policy between now and 2050, we see a dramatic transition. And I'll finish with two quotes from the Financial Times recently. Shell: "The company needs to innovate for a world of surprises. Embracing the approach of Silicon Valley has meant creating some pockets of the business," and I think we heard this actually, "which feel quite different to the established structures." And Saudi Aramco: "Uber is potentially more disruptive than electric vehicles by reducing private car ownership." Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a disruptive transition. Financials are on the side of actually making this mission possible rather than mission impossible. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much, Anthony. And we will move from one point with regard to disruption to the next. And I'm delighted to introduce another man who has made a bit of a change in his career, and that is Inge Sanvik from Wilhelmsen. He is the Chief Digital Officer, and he does not have a long track record in shipping. He comes from what I think routinely is called disruptive technologies. May I even call you an app man? I think you have created apps to make sure that artists can stay in close contact with their fans. So how can you use that, Inge André, in shipping?
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm happy to be here in Tromsø as well. I was actually a student here 25 years ago, and excited to see all these new buildings, such as this one here. Business in a low-carbon world, mission impossible. Well, Wilhelmsen started out 156 years ago as a zero-emission shipping company. And as it was said in the prior presentation, the technology from zero emission or low carbon footprint is really changing this business. And how may this technology and digitalization be a facilitator for this low-carbon business? Well, we think it's a huge opportunity, and it's the first time in history we see now that the technology from from carbon or high footprint carbon technologies are being disrupted. And we in Wilhelmsen see that for us that have a mission of shaping this industry, we see huge potential for how technology can help us do that. And a lot of people are talking about how this digital transformation is going to impact us. But what is this digital transformation? Well, it's this convergence between technology innovation, as we heard about earlier today, and new business model innovation, and enabled by connectivity. And this is a huge opportunity now for us, giving access to all this technology that's mainly coming from the consumer industry. And a lot of innovation is happening because of open platforms and open source technologies, and companies such as Tesla, Elon Musk, and Google and Microsoft is open sourcing a lot of these technologies, and that's enabling exponential growth of opportunities. And if you look at one interesting case here, we heard a lot about autonomous ships and autonomous cars, and Yara Birkeland is truly a great example of this new innovation in technology and new business models. And what they're going to do is that they are going to disrupt transport of cars. I'm sorry, not cars, but transport of goods by cars, reducing 40,000 journeys, going from one place to another from their facility, and putting this ship in as a replacement. As it was said, low carbon footprint, even zero carbon footprint, autonomous ship operations, sensors, connectivity, where we have broadband radio and 4G connectivity, automatic mooring. You will have a shore operations center, so you can remotely control this, and you can use all of this data to improve the supply chain and the efficiency. And this is going to be launched next year. And as I started with saying about the sail ship transformation that Wilhelmsen did, moving from sail to steam, this is truly a point in history where we now see the same thing happening again, but this time it's technology that is so much more disruptive in terms of improving the technologies that have high carbon footprint. So imagine if this technology and application area could be used along the whole coastline of Norway, where we can see transport of fish, or how this could impact oil and gas industry with ships or utilization of ships. So I think we will see a lot of this going to happen in the nearshore, along the nearshore, on the deep sea, where we are currently a major player. It will take a lot of time, but I hope to see that in the next 10 to 15 years that we will have these autonomous ships going up and down the coastline of Norway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Inge and André, and with, of course, a good closing number for you. Bjørn Haguland from DNV GL is not only Executive Vice President, but indeed Chief Sustainability Officer of DNV Veritas GL. And I think he has a slogan, maybe DNV slogan, but I've often seen it in connection with yourself, Bjørn, and that is business as a force for good. And Bjørn has been in Veritas for quite some time, and he has been in Asia. He has been a few years in South Korea and more than 4 years in China. So you're well set to share with us Veritas' ideas about, is it possible with a low carbon world?
Thank you so much.
Very good.
So let me use my 5 minutes to give you 5 reflections on why we in DNVGL strongly believe that it is a mission possible to do business in a low-carbon future. And not only mission possible, but it opens huge opportunities. First and foremost, humanity live in a kick-ass era. Never before have so many humans had it as good as we have today. Measured along access to energy, access to water, access to education, vaccination, and all of this. So this is where we are today, but of course it have come with a cost. The cost is on the environment. That is becoming obvious for all of us now, and a lot of what is going on forward is to fight those environmental issues. And the world have come together and made a plan. It is a vision, it is a plan for the planet in the 17 UN sustainability goals. So more than 190 countries have adopted this plan, and here we have plans for ocean, for energy, and for many other areas. And business has really embraced this agenda. Business have taken this as an innovation agenda to see how can business develop solutions to address these social challenges. And that is basically the role of business in society, to solve social challenges. This is nothing new, this is rather old. If you go back to history and see many of the great companies have been founded on the idea to solve some kind of a social challenges. And one of the biggest challenges we are into is obviously the energy transition. It is rapid, it is disruptive, it comes into all sectors of energy, rather being production, distribution, electrification of transportations. We have seen examples here today on electrification on land, on sea. We will see it in air. So this is really dramatic, and it is rapid. And it is many technologies moving forward at the same time. So it's very much technology-driven, and it gives opportunities for everybody, I think, which is a little bit ahead and curious of what is going on. So the whole energy landscape are changing dramatically, and we saw some numbers here earlier today. A lot of the changes is bottom-up. And the good thing is that it's so many solutions out there. And I've been sitting here over the two days and seen a lot of the solutions. So these are bottom-up solutions. It's coming from definitely the developed part of the world, but a lot is coming from China, from India, from everywhere. In a connected world, these solutions can be transported, ideas can be transported, can be built on, and this is what is going on here. So what I show you here is a platform we do in DNVGL together with a think tank Sustainia and with UN, with more than 1,000 solutions. And you can search the solution on the SDGs or industry sector. And as we speak, this database is filling up. And my last perspective to you is about the next generation. The young generation. Is it anybody above 40 here? I see a lot. The young generation have sustainability much more embedded in how they think society should work. They are curious about solving some of the big issues. And obviously, it's so many opportunities when technology is changing as dramatically as it is today. So my call to action to all of you is really to think as leaders how you integrate young ideas into your business model, into your innovation processes, to make sure that you are able to innovate quick enough. Because I think the youth is a great asset when it comes to innovation in the low carbon future. They are holding that future. They will really like to see that the environment is cleaned up and they can pass the planet on to their children in a better condition then they take it over from us. So good luck, and thank you for inviting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, please join me on the stage. Thank you very much, and thank you, Bjørn. Please, free seating. I would like to pick up on some of the last items you addressed, Bjørn, and the SDG, right? So it didn't used to be an abbreviation we were familiar with, but we simply have to embrace it now. So Sustainable Development Goals. You say that business has embraced the SDGs. Now, that's not always the case, that the high-level policy objectives are integrated in business planning and business strategy. Could you expand a bit on why is that and how do you see that?
Yeah, so I think it is mainly driven by risk. I think what we saw during the Paris Agreement, that government and businesses are adapting to a different future with the Sustainable Development Goals. We see that businesses are good at risk management. Climate risk is a rising risk these days. Risk of extreme weather is affecting a lot of us. Investors are starting asking questions. How are you adapting to these risks? And in that perspective, at least from DNV, we are working with more than 100,000 customers in more than 100 countries. We see a lot of the leading businesses are using the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals to de-risk their operation.
So, Anthony, do you recognize this trend? Do you see how the policy-shaped tools are actually becoming relevant to business?
To some extent. Actually, I mean, I'd pick up on the point, and I know you didn't mean this, but I think it's important to clarify. We're not, when we talk about the environment and the planet, we've always got to remind ourselves, we are not, the human race is not disconnected from that. We sometimes forget that because we've created this whole economic system and we forget that it's connected to the real world, the real resources, and so forth. So when we talk about this, we're talking about our own civilization, our ability to continue with these amazing benefits. Because if we don't get that right, a lot of these gains that you outlined that we have the benefit of at the moment will be lost in a destabilized climate, a destabilized world. Now, I think we are seeing some of that because it's in our interest, and increasingly, yes, you're right, you know, investors and the financial markets want more disclosure around these, and they're paying attention now in a way they didn't before. Paris was fascinating because in many ways it was the first time at a global climate negotiation that the financial markets turned up. I mean, the governor of a major central bank turned up, not only turned up, made a major announcement setting up the Financial Stability Board's task force on climate-related disclosure with Michael Bloomberg. But the problem is, it's not happening fast enough. So we're going in the right direction now, but it's all about the speed. You know, the hope is that it makes financial sense, and if we don't do it, people will lose money, and there's huge risk. But we need now policy to get behind the technological transition and ensure it happens fast enough.
I'll let you briefly respond, Bjørn.
Yeah, now just to agree on that. I mean, what have happened through Paris and the Sustainable Development Goals is basically set a direction, but it is not enough at all, and it is too slow. I mean, this 2030 agenda, that is 12 years from now. It is 5,000 days. So, I mean, to really kind of clean up this, you know, it requires much more urgency. Yeah.
Trygve, if I can revert to you, I mean, the promise of what you outline, and that has already been implemented into day-to-day operations. Could you put that a bit in the context of the Arctic or the high north regions? Because we've seen during the last 2 days how people are talking about stakeholder management, emotions, perceptions about the vulnerabilities of the Arctic, or indeed lack of knowledge about there being many Arctics. Can you link the results of what Cognite represents to a message that will communicate better about, for instance, oil and gas on the Norwegian continental shelf in the Barents Sea?
Yeah, so I think by allowing more people and people with specific talents in certain areas to have access to data in a very easy way, I think we can create communities and we can engage more people and therefore also create understanding and insight into what's going on. I think that is what technologies that Cognite represent can provide to not only the companies that operate equipment, but everyone else that have domain expertise that is genuinely interested in how we're basically how we're operating in the Arctic.
If I can just have a follow-up question, because I know Aker has business interests and activities both within oil services and within exploration and production. Do you think that has been helpful in the opening up of access to data, as the traditional idea is that oil services would like to do something, they tell you that the operators won't let them do it, and vice versa? Has that been helpful, or is that not relevant?
I think it's, as we see across multiple industries, that when you unlock the data and you really get some insight to things that people can't really put together very easily by just looking at a massive amount of data manually. I think when you start opening that box of information and knowledge, I think that that does help, and it give set in the context of utilizing the skills that in the oil and gas industry we have in Norway. I think that does help a lot and contributing to making better decisions.
So, Anne-Grete, when I came to see you last year in Kristiansand at NODE, we had a long discussion about one of the phrases you've coined with others, the digital highway. Can you link that concept to what Trygve just said?
Absolutely. That's one of the key issues that we've been working on in the last report now from Kongkraft. To be able to work together, sharing data, we have to have a common highway for data sharing. And the model we used in the work has been the Norwegian bank model, where all the banks are transferring data on the same data highway, or you call it BBS at the early days. And we also need to look into how can we make a format and data in context specification. We need some standardization to be able to exchange data. It's not a lack of data in our industry. We are swimming in data. We've been collecting data for years. And we have big databases for drilling, for production, for seismic. But we have not had the tools to process it yet. But now we have capabilities in artificial intelligence. We have stronger machines. So this is something that can really give us insight into a new knowledge about both what we can find on the ground, but also how to operate it safer and do it more environmental friendly. But if I can just add, we're discussing a lot, where is the oil industry moving? And I think we are following very closely the majors, because the way they are looking at the world will also implement what the suppliers need to adapt to. And what I see is that all the majors now are looking at the market changes we see. That's been described here. In the transportation sector, in the electricity sector. And they are also moving into investment in these sectors. And that is a good thing, because you need big capital to be able to lift big projects, which can be, you can invest in without subsidies. Then you need to think big. You cannot think 5 or 6 windmills. You have to think 20 or 100. and then you need big money to go in. And that's good, because when the big companies are going in with the experience they have in the open sea, you would have a different supply chain, you would have a different type of technology coming in, and you would have a different type of industrial mindset coming into the industry, which will bring the cost down, which is very good.
Anthony.
Could I pick up on that? That's absolutely right. Just to develop that a little bit further. I mean, you know, the big change for the oil and gas sector is it's going, and I think they're already grappling with this, is they've been in growth for almost 100 years. And now psychologically, they've got to move to an ex-growth mindset. If they continue in a growth mindset, they're going to destroy a huge amount of value in those companies and shareholder value. So shareholders are not going to let them do that. So what is an ex-growth? You know, effectively, the 30-year runoff of the oil and gas industry, because by 2050, we cannot be burning any more oil and gas. So if you're looking at an investment to open up a field that's going to need 30, 40, 50 years, then forget it. But we still need some of that. Just to give you, I think, concrete examples, in the power sector, I mean, the big supply companies like GE now are really suffering. I mean, their market for the big sort of turbines that you put in a coal-fired power station is almost completely gone. So is the servicing around that. And they're now much earlier than they thought. They're running into the same problem with the gas turbines business. It's just collapsed. And again, huge part of that is the servicing of those gas turbines. So what's happening in the oil and gas sector? UK offshore is really interesting. Talking to some people there, some of the MPs are now really changing their view on which side is their bread buttered, an English expression, particularly the Conservative MPs, because now they see that the offshore wind industry in the UK is bigger in terms of tax, employment, and lobbying now than the offshore oil and gas industry. Where have all those offshore oil and gas marine engineers gone? Well, a lot of them have now become offshore wind engineers. So we are in this transition, and the world is going to look, and energy is going to look very different. Actually, I think digital disruption is going to play a huge part in that. You know, in the same way, you know, Kodak executives probably couldn't have imagined back in the 90s, as they went bankrupt, what photography was going to look like in 2017 or 2018. I think it's the same for energy executives now.
This is very true. I would remind you, though, that Agfa film is still in production and still making a profit. So there are examples on both sides of it.
The size is...
Please, just a quick remark to you, and then I'll turn to Inge.
Yes, I think we are talking a lot about transportation and electricity sector, and we tend to forget that oil and gas is also a feedstock. And most of the things we are surrounded with is coming from many of these productions. The cars, the carbon fibers, a lot of clothing, etc., etc. So yes, there are still a lot of, you know, this is more and more of the oil goes into that sector because of there is more, you know, more cars, etc., etc. around the world. So I think we should not forget that there are other sectors where we are supplying than the electricity sector and also the transportation sector. But last point, just also that in the 1.5 and the 2-point scenario, it's still quite a lot of oil and gas in that scenario. We should not forget that, even if we can reach those targets. And then it would be a question, who can supply the cleanest oil and gas to the world in that scenario?
Thank you. We've learned during the day also from several of the speakers that it's hard to describe. We're in the middle of a shift. Things are transforming, and we're very close to the pattern re-emerging, so it's really hard to tell. And I think really Trygve and yourself are probably the ones who have positioned yourself best to try to do that, because you've changed sector, you've put on different set of glasses, and that's why I'm keen to try to draw you out on what were your reflections as you came into shipping. You were not born into shipping. You came into a very international, very interesting, very modern business. But what did you see with the agenda and with the tasks that you were given?
Well, we have more than 20,000 people in Wilhelmsen that knows shipping. So we have plenty of people doing that. I think getting the perspective from others and from the outside, and given that the new technologies that we are seeing and the new platforms and data needs to be lifted up from the silos and being organized and structured and contextualized in a different way, so we can start building applications. So that's kind of back to my app history. And that's kind of where I see the amazing opportunity now, is that we are at a time in history where these technologies that are good for the environment are the disruptive ones. And they're more accessible. The cost of storing data is lower than ever before in the history. Processing data is the same. And the connectivity of data that was said earlier about all the capabilities we have around connectivity. So right now, in the next 5 to 10 years, now we're in the kind of the deployment phase, where the technology is so cheap and so accessible and so able, and anyone with a $1,000 laptop can start building applications on top of Cognite or any other type of data platforms. So if we sort out the standardization of data, the contextualization, cleaning up this and having good master data structures, then we can start running in a far higher speed than we're doing right now. And what the strongest asset we have here in Norway is that we have such close relationships with the government. So the regulators are kind of moving in the same pace as well, as I mentioned with the example with the autonomous ships. That wouldn't be possible for Norway to take a lead position in this race if it was not for the government kind of pushing this and facilitating this revolution.
Thank you. Bjørn?
Yeah, I was just saying that, I mean, if you don't aware of what's going on in the shipping sector, you should really kind of look into it, because that's a real transition. It's a great opportunity for Norway, because by doing what we are doing now, we are reducing our carbon footprint. We are creating new jobs, and I think we have companies in the whole value chain, and by doing it in Norway, we are really giving these companies more competitive advantages out in the world. So we are in the start of a transition. It is driven by Norway. It's a lot of digitalization, but the end game will be cleaner, a more efficient, and a more competitive industry.
Trygve, I think I'm going to let you get a final word. When you look at how Cognite works now, do you think that is transferable to other sectors, and how?
I definitely think it's transferable. I think everyone have, at least in the industrial world, we've seen it in the consumer world. And I think it is something that is extremely important, that everyone that operates in the manufacturing or heavy asset industry, they have the same issues. We've seen this through the work that we've done already, and absolutely I believe it's transferable to everyone that is involved in some degree of heavy equipment or industrial applications.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to the audience, and have a good evening.